So in this video we're going to talk about two different sort of subject areas. The first one is how are you going to be making a change and an alteration towards your game, and just whilst I sort of hit some shots, just talk about what's important, and then that way at least you know when you're sort of practicing if you're doing the right and wrong things. And I think the second thing is also a drill which is really helpful for the release. So like I said, this week and probably going in towards next week, 'cause it's quite a complicated area, we're going to talk a lot about the release, okay? And that would be a combination of the sort of cocking and uncocking motion of the wrist, but also the sort of rolling motion. Now, in the last video, I talked about one of the things that you definitely want to be avoiding, which is going to have absolute disastrous effects to your release, is if you start sort of moving your wrists in this, or your forearms in this sort of fashion too soon. Okay, so what happens in the golf swing is that your forearm and your upper arm, they're going to be moving around. Okay, so there's going to be an element of pronation and supination, and if you start moving too much this way too soon, then your release is gone. The club head's always going to overtake the hands and you're always going to end up looking too flicky. So what I said is the most golden rule really is to make sure that you keep that trail arm pointing up towards the sky for as long as possible. And that's obviously scary because, you know, it does things like makes you feel like you're exposing the hosel of the club and all the rest of it. And I get that, but I think that's probably why it's one of the amateur golfers' biggest sort of tendencies to get steep, is so it feels a lot sort of safer. Right, so the best drill, I think, and this is the drill that works pretty much all the time with any student that I offer it to, is to do a bit of a I don't know what you kind of class it as, just sort of like a hand separation exercise. So what you would do is, if that was my normal grip, I would start off by just keeping my trail hand in the same position, so my palm is still on the thumb, okay, like so, on my lead thumb, but I just sort of separate my hands off like this, and I would just sort of hit a couple of shots like so. So I kind of just hit a couple of sort of short shots, and all I'm trying to do is just keep that my right palm in contact with my left thumb like so. Okay, now what this is going to do is this is going to encourage you to keep your hands moving through that hitting area. It's also going to help you by doing that. So by encouraging my hands to move more this way, it's going to keep that forearm upward facing, and equally what it's going to do is it's going to help me bring the club down on plane and stop any of this. Because what you don't want to do in this type of exercise is notice the way that this hand comes off, because that would suggest that you're sort of flipping. So you just hit a couple of shots, little short shots like this, and this I think is a really good exercise. Now, the question would then be, well, what's really influencing that sort of impact? And I would say that it's a combination of both. So I'm not advocating that this trail hand is pushing that club through and that's the reason why my impact looks the way it does. I actually think it's a lot to do with the pivoting action and how my lead shoulder operates. So if I don't rotate, you know, then my shoulder gets stuck, my hands are going to go like so, and I can't keep up. So it is a really good exercise, because what you tend to find is people naturally rotate because of the tendency of what the drill is asking you to do. So the question now would be, well, how do you improve? You know, so whether you're somebody who's doing a drill, an exercise, whether you're doing, you know, something more dynamic like a step drill, or whether you're working on a backswing position, what's the process and how do you take that to the golf course? Well, I think a good rule is a 75% rule. So a 75% rule essentially means that you are pretty comfortable with what you're doing, but you're sort of 25% unfamiliar with it as well. Okay, so for example, if you started to do this drill, you might go, oh my God, that's so alien, I've never been there before, I would never be able to take that to the golf course, and that's fine. Now, if you try to take that level of severity to the golf course, you're going to have a disaster. And you might kind of say to yourself, oh, that's okay, I'll persevere through. But hand on heart, what tends to happen is we don't. We don't tend to persevere through. The results are bad for one game of golf, one practice session, two practice sessions, and eventually you'll sort of quit on it and go back to type, which is obviously what we don't want to be doing. So the way you would sort of transfer this is, and this is why I wanted to talk about this drill, is like you would do a few of those and you'd go, oh yeah, okay, you might video it and you'd go, oh, I can't believe how much further my hands are forward and how much more I'm pivoting. And then what you might start to do is, let's say that was really uncomfortable. Well, instead of holding it like so, what you might start to do is just grip it something like this, where maybe you just get more of a sense that you're not interlocking quite as sort of hard, or as talking as much with the fingers, so you kind of feel like your sort of trail hand is a little bit more there as a support. So maybe the pressure is more created through the palm and the index finger, so I'm still wrapping those fingers around, but I can definitely get more of a sense that between my finger here and potentially through my palm, that's where most of the pressure is. And all of a sudden then I can probably take that same feeling on towards the golf course, where it feels a little bit unfamiliar. So I know that I'm learning, doing something new, but it's not too drastic either. And that's the key thing, because if you're somebody who gets that sequencing wrong and you move too much this way when it comes to the release, and all of a sudden you're trying to encourage yourself to do this, your pivot and the rotation of your lead hand is going to play a massive role in your ability to square that club face up. So the general message from this video is you've got to be really careful with how you're practicing, because if you're working on a drill or an exercise, you can't necessarily just keep working on that drill or exercise, because what the research sort of shows is that you'll just become better at that drill or exercise. So you have to quickly try and go, okay, how comfortable is that feeling, and try and use that as a parameter. So unless you are a very elitist golfer, or you're a golfer who is incredibly content with your technique, then you in essence don't necessarily need to work on making a swing change. But if you're somebody who's trying to change your swing and trying to improve your positions because you know it will give you more consistency, more distance, eliminate bad shots, then I would suggest trying to always operate in that sort of 75% percentile would give you that continued development, and it's also something therefore you can take to the golf course as well. And that way you'll be, in theory, continuing to develop all the time. So have a go at the drill, and what I'm sort of saying is you can sort of bring it out onto the golf course, but to a lesser degree, and that way you're always keeping that growth mentality of development, but without being too drastic that it's going to massively upset the results on your game. See you guys again really soon.